I never thought I'd reach a point in life where my own child would see me as a burden. After all the years of sacrifice, after every late night and every early morning spent making sure he had more than I ever did, I believed respect and love would be the one thing I could count on. But life has a way of showing you truths you don't want to face. Before I tell you the whole story, let me introduce myself. My name is Joan Whitaker, and I'm 72 years old. I live alone now, in a modest little house with a front porch, where I like to sit in the evenings with a cup of tea. Before we go further, I'd love for you to tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always amazed at how stories like mine reach people across the country, and even across oceans. It makes me feel less alone, knowing there are others who've walked roads like mine. Now, let me begin properly. My days used to be filled with routine, the kind of rhythm that comes when you've lived long enough to know peace matters more than speed. I'd wake early, not because I had to anymore, but because the birds outside my window seemed to keep better time than any alarm clock. I'd water my small garden, fuss over my roses, and sometimes sit on the little wooden bench under the oak tree my late husband planted when our son, David, was born. That tree had grown tall and strong, just like I once hoped David would. In the quiet mornings, I often thought of the boy who used to run in circles around it, his laughter filling the air. Those memories kept me company on the lonelier days. David doesn't live far from me. He married Melissa about 10 years ago, and they bought a house not more than 20 minutes away. For a long time, I thought I was lucky. So many mothers my age barely see their sons, but mine was close enough to visit. And in the beginning, he did. Every Sunday, he'd stop by for lunch, and we'd sit at the kitchen table like old times. Melissa came too, though she often seemed distracted, always checking her phone or talking about something she wanted to buy. At first, I thought it was just the way of the younger generation. They live differently, don't they? Always rushing, always chasing after the next thing. I didn't judge her for it. I told myself she'd warm to me in time. I even went out of my way to make her feel welcome, cooking her favorite dishes, buying little things I thought she might like. But over the years, I noticed small changes. David's visits became shorter, sometimes rushed. When Melissa joined him, she had a sharp way of speaking, her words like little pins pricking at me, though she'd laugh as though it were all in good fun. "Don't strain yourself, Joan," she'd say when I reached to set the table. "You're not as useful these days." Then she'd giggle, like it was a harmless joke. It wasn't harmless to me. Each comment chipped away at something inside, though I kept a smile on my face. I told myself she didn't mean it. Maybe she just didn't know how her words sounded. Maybe David didn't notice. Or maybe he thought ignoring it was easier than speaking up. Still, I held on to hope. Mothers always do, don't we? We hold on, even when the rope is fraying in our hands. I had been alone since my husband passed years ago. The house was quiet, and though I learned to live with the silence, having David nearby was a comfort. I wanted to believe that, no matter what, he'd be there. I wanted to believe family ties were stronger than anything else. But as the months passed, I started to feel a distance growing, not just in miles, but in spirit. He called less. He laughed less when he did visit. And Melissa, well, she seemed more comfortable when I wasn't in the room. I told myself not to worry. I told myself it was just the natural course of things, that children grow, start families, and mothers must learn to let go. Still, there was a heaviness that lingered in me, a whisper that maybe letting go wouldn't be enough. Maybe I was already being pushed away, and I was right. The day would come when I would hear words no mother should ever hear, words that cut so deeply I still remember the sound of them in my ears, words from Melissa's lips, spoken without shame, with my own son standing by in silence. But I'll come to that soon. For now, I want you to understand the quiet before the storm, the way I still believed in love, the way I still tried to hold our family together with kindness. Because only when you see the whole picture can you truly understand how it feels when the frame finally cracks. It's funny how the smallest comments can reveal the deepest truths. They come dressed as jokes, coated with a smile, but underneath, they're sharp enough to draw blood. That's how it began with Melissa, my daughter-in-law. Not all at once, but in pieces, as if testing how much I'd tolerate before I spoke up. I remember one Sunday when David and Melissa came for lunch. I'd spent the morning making roast chicken with rosemary, the way David liked it when he was a boy. I set the table with my good dishes, the china I usually kept tucked away for holidays. I wanted them to feel cared for. As I was carrying the plates, Melissa laughed and said, "Careful, Joan. You don't want to trip. At your age, one fall could be the end of you." She said it casually, not with concern, but with amusement, as though my fragility was something funny. David chuckled softly, not in agreement exactly, but not in protest either. My face flushed, though I tried to brush it off. I smiled politely and set the plates down, but inside I felt a sting I couldn't quite shake. Another time, when I offered Melissa a slice of pie, she waved it away and said, "You really shouldn't trouble yourself baking anymore. It's not like you have the energy for this." Then she added, with that same thin smile, "Leave the work to younger people. Younger people." I suppose she meant herself, though I rarely saw her lift a finger in her own kitchen. But I said nothing. I simply folded my hands in my lap and nodded, as if I agreed. What else could I do? To speak up would have turned the moment into something ugly, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to embarrass David or put him in the middle. That was the pattern. Little remarks, each one leaving behind a bruise no one could see. And David, my David, just let them pass, as though he didn't hear, or as though silence was easier than defense. At night, when I sat by myself with my tea, I'd replay those words in my head. I'd tell myself she didn't mean them the way they sounded. I'd remind myself that times had changed, that maybe younger women spoke more directly. But deep down, I knew. I knew she meant them. It wasn't just words either. Melissa had a way of looking at me that made me feel small. If I asked a question, her eyebrows would arch, as though she couldn't believe I didn't already know the answer. If I joined a conversation between her and David, she'd fall silent, waiting until I stopped speaking, and then start up again, as if I hadn't said anything at all. And slowly, I began to notice a shift in David. When it was just the two of us, he was still warm, still the boy I raised. But around Melissa, he grew quieter toward me, less affectionate, less present. It was as if he wanted to avoid conflict by fading into the background, even if it meant leaving me exposed to her barbs. The hardest part wasn't her words, it was his silence. A mother can take a lot of blows from the world if she knows her child stands beside her. But when your own child stands by while someone else chips away at you, it cuts far deeper than any insult ever could. One evening after they left, I sat in my chair by the window and thought about the years behind me. The long shifts at the diner, the nights I came home exhausted, but still helped David with his homework, the winters when the heat barely worked, and I bundled us both in blankets so he could stay warm. I thought about the way I'd clapped the loudest at his graduation, the way I'd tucked away a little money each month to help him buy his first car, and now here I was, treated like a fragile nuisance in my own home. Still, I held on to hope. Mothers always do. I told myself Melissa would soften with time. Maybe she didn't understand the value of respect yet. Maybe David would see it and put a stop to it. Maybe. But deep down, I had begun to sense it, the undercurrent of something darker. Melissa wasn't just careless with her words. She meant them. She believed them. And it was only a matter of time before she spoke the truth out loud, without disguise. That truth would come soon enough, and when it did, it would shatter something inside me I thought could never break. There are moments in life that brand themselves into your memory, no matter how much time passes. The sound of a newborn's first cry, the hush of a final goodbye, and sometimes words you wish you could unhear. For me, that moment came one quiet Saturday evening, over a dinner table that should have been filled with warmth, but instead left me cold all the way through. David had called earlier in the week, saying he and Melissa would stop by. I was glad. Lonely days blur together, and the thought of having company lifted my spirits. I spent the day preparing their favourite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, just like my husband used to love. I even baked an apple cobbler, the smell of cinnamon filling the kitchen, hoping maybe it would soften Melissa's sharp edges. They arrived late, Melissa sweeping in with her designer purse slung over her arm, David trailing behind with that tired look I had begun to recognize. He kissed my cheek quickly before setting his phone on the table. Melissa didn't bother with a hug. She simply said, "Smells good in here," in a flat voice that carried more obligation than sincerity. Dinner began politely enough. We talked about the weather, about David's work, about Melissa's endless complaints regarding her neighbors. I tried to keep up, smiling where I could, though her words often slipped past me like smoke. Then, after dessert, the evening took a turn I'll never forget. I had gone into the kitchen to bring coffee to the table. The pot was heavy in my hands, and I moved slowly, steadying myself. As I walked back toward the dining room, I heard Melissa's voice, low, sharp, carrying that tone she used when she thought I wasn't listening. "She's a burden, David. Don't you see it? She's going to ruin us if we keep letting her lean on us." My heart stopped. I froze in the hallway, the coffee pot trembling in my grip. For a moment, I waited for David to defend me, to remind her that I was his mother, that I had given everything for him. But the words never came. Instead, there was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I stepped into the room quietly, setting the coffee down with hands that shook more than I wanted them to. Neither of them looked at me right away. Melissa sipped her water, her face calm, unbothered. David shifted in his seat, eyes cast down at his phone, as though if he avoided my gaze, he could pretend he hadn't heard me enter. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? My heart ached, but my pride held me upright. I poured the coffee into their cups with steady hands, forcing myself not to spill, forcing my lips into a polite smile that felt brittle as glass. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Melissa chatted about a new furniture set she wanted. David nodded absently, and I sat there, a ghost at my own table. Every word they spoke floated above me, meaningless, because all I could hear was the echo of her cruelty. "She's a burden. She'll ruin us." Later that night, when the dishes were washed and the house was quiet again, I sat, alone, at the kitchen table. The oak clock on the wall ticked steadily, the sound of passing time. I thought about everything I had done to make sure David had a life better than mine, how I worked 2 jobs after his father died, never letting him go to bed hungry, how I paid his tuition, even when it meant going without new clothes for myself, how I had quietly given money when he and Melissa struggled to buy their home. And now, to Melissa, I was nothing more than dead weight. Worse, to David, I wasn't worth defending. Tears came then, hot and silent. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud, as though someone might hear. But there was no one left to hear, was there? Just me and 4 walls that had seen too much already. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Melissa's words over and over, each time cutting deeper. My son's silence replayed just as painfully. It wasn't just what she had said. It was that he let her say it, that he let me sit there, serving coffee, as though nothing had happened. Something inside me shifted that night. A part of me, perhaps the part that had clung to hope, cracked. I realized I could no longer excuse her cruelty, no longer tell myself it was harmless, and I could no longer ignore the truth. My own son had chosen silence over his mother, but what neither of them knew was that the very thing Melissa feared, dependence, burden, ruin, was backward. It wasn't me leaning on them, it was them leaning on me. And soon enough, they were going to find out just how much. When people call you a burden, they assume you are the one taking. But what Melissa didn't know, what even David had long forgotten, was that I had been quietly giving all along. You see, years ago, when David first married Melissa, they struggled. He had just started a new job, and Melissa was still finding her footing. They wanted a home, but money was tight. I remember sitting with David at my kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him, his face drawn with worry. "Mum," he had whispered, "I don't know how we're going to manage this." That night, I offered to co-sign for their house and put aside some savings I had been tucking away for years. It wasn't much, but it gave them breathing room. To make things easier, I opened a joint family account, a cushion for emergencies, where I deposited money whenever I could. It became a habit, one I never mentioned again. At first it was small amounts, 100 here, 200 there. Then, as my pension checks came in and I lived frugally, I continued adding to it. Over the years, that account quietly grew, and whenever bills piled too high for David and Melissa, I'd notice withdrawals. Whenever Melissa posted pictures of their new purchases online, trips, jewelry, renovations, I saw the numbers dip, and I said nothing. Because isn't that what mothers do? We give quietly in the background, while our children take center stage. We don't ask for thanks. We don't demand acknowledgement. We just keep giving, hoping our love will carry them further than they could go alone. But as I sat in the silence of my kitchen that night, after Melissa's cruel words, I thought of that account. I thought of how, in her eyes, I was ruining them. The irony nearly made me laugh through my tears. She had no idea that without me, their life would be crumbling already. I opened my old ledger book, the one where I recorded deposits and withdrawals. Each entry told a story. March 2012, $500, David laid off for 2 months. December 2015, $1,200, Melissa's medical bills. July 2018, $800, down payment on their car. Page after page, I saw the invisible threads of sacrifice that tied me to their survival. And in that moment, something hardened inside me. For so long, I had carried the weight quietly, thinking it was my duty, my love, my role as a mother. But that night, I realized love should never mean being stepped on. Respect should not be optional. Melissa wanted to believe I was dependent on them. The truth was the opposite. They were dependent on me. The burden was the very backbone of their security. I made my decision the next morning. I dressed neatly, put on my coat, and walked down to the local bank. The young teller behind the counter smiled politely, unaware that she was about to witness a turning point in my life. "I'd like to close an account," I said firmly, sliding the paperwork toward her. She looked it over, nodded, and began typing. "Do you want the funds transferred to another account, Mrs. Whitaker?" "Yes," I replied, handing her my personal account details. All of it. As she worked, I stood tall, my hands steady. For once, I didn't feel like an aging woman fading into the background. I felt strong, decisive. The teller confirmed the transfer, stamped the paperwork, and handed me a receipt. Walking out of that bank, the autumn wind brisk against my cheeks, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for David to notice me. I wasn't hoping Melissa would soften. I had taken back control of my life. I didn't call them. I didn't warn them. I simply went back to my little house, tended my garden, and carried on. I made my tea, watched my shows, and slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. I knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered what had happened. Bills would bounce, cards would decline, and Melissa's shopping sprees would come to a grinding halt. And when that moment came, I didn't plan to gloat or yell. No, I would let them see the truth for themselves. They thought I was a burden. They were about to learn just how much they had been leaning on me all along. Revenge is a word people often imagine as loud and fiery. Shouting matches, slammed doors, big dramatic scenes. But the truth is, sometimes the most powerful revenge is quiet, silent, the kind that doesn't require a single raised voice, only patience. That's the kind I chose. After I closed the account, I didn't tell David or Melissa. I didn't leave a note. I didn't hint at anything. I simply went about my days as if nothing had changed. That week, I planted winter pansies in my garden, the purple blooms bright against the fading autumn leaves. I took long walks around the block, waved to neighbors, and sat on my porch in the evenings with a blanket over my knees. But inside, I carried a calm certainty. The storm was coming. It didn't take long. Only a few days later, my phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. I recognized David's number, and for a fleeting second, my heart leapt like it used to, back when he'd called just to say hello. But the voice on the other end wasn't warm. It was strained. "Mum?" he said. His words clipped. "Do you know what's going on with the bank? Our mortgage payment bounced. Melissa's furious." I held the phone steady, my voice even. "I'm not sure, David. Have you been keeping track of your expenses?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a frustrated sigh. "Of course we have. Something's wrong. Melissa tried to pay the credit card bill, and it wouldn't go through either." I murmured something neutral, not confirming, not denying. We ended the call shortly after, and I sat back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I had done. For years, I had been the invisible safety net. Now, for the first time, they were standing without it. The calls kept coming. 2 days later, David again. This time his voice cracked at the edges. "Mum, we're behind already. Melissa's screaming at me. What's going on? Did you move the money?" I let a moment pass before answering, the kind of pause that makes the truth heavier. "David," I said softly, "that account was mine. I put the money there. For years I kept it going, but I've decided to close it." There was silence, then a sharp inhale. You what? Mum, you can't just... Melissa's going to lose it. We need that money. We've been counting on it." His words struck me, not with guilt, but with bitter irony. Counting on it. They had been counting on me all along, while telling themselves I was the one leaning on them. "I think," I said carefully, "it's time you learned to manage without me. You're grown now. You and Melissa can handle your own lives." The line went quiet. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to piece together just how much I had given over the years. Finally, he whispered, "Mum, why didn't you tell me?" But before I could answer, I heard Melissa in the background, her voice sharp as glass. "Ask her to fix it. Tell her she has to." The call ended abruptly. I sat back in my chair, my heart heavy but resolute. I didn't want to hurt David, but I knew now this was the only way. He needed to see, truly see, what had been holding his life together. And Melissa, well, she needed to understand that the woman she dismissed as a burden had been the very reason she enjoyed the life she did. The week that followed was eerily quiet. I imagined the arguments echoing through their house, The frantic balancing of bills, the long silences between them. A part of me pitied David, because I knew he was caught between shame and loyalty to his wife. But another part of me, one that had been trampled too many times, felt a quiet vindication. Every morning I poured my tea, looked out at my garden, and told myself, this is not spite. This is justice. For too long, I gave without being seen. Now, I would let the absence of my giving speak louder than anything I could ever say. And it did. Because 1 week later, David showed up at my doorstep. Alone. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped. And for the first time in years, he wasn't my proud, confident son. He was a man who had finally realized just how much he had taken for granted. I'll never forget the look on his face that morning. It was a grey, overcast day, the kind where even the sun seemed too tired to shine. I was sitting at my kitchen table, knitting a scarf for the winter, when I heard the knock at the door. Not a polite knock, not the casual tap of someone stopping by for coffee, but a heavy, urgent pounding. I opened it to find David standing there. My son. My only child. His shirt wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes rimmed red as if he hadn't slept in days. He looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in spirit. Behind him, parked on the curb, I saw Melissa sitting in the passenger seat of their car. She didn't come to the door. She just sat there, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, her glare sharp even through the windshield. "Mum," David said, his voice breaking. "Please, we need to talk." I stepped aside and let him in. He sank into the chair at the kitchen table like a man carrying the weight of the world. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just ran his hands over his face, sighing as though searching for words. Finally, he looked up at me, eyes wet. "Mum," he whispered, "why did you do it? Why did you close the account? We're drowning without it. The bills, the mortgage, Melissa's—" He stopped himself. "We can't keep up." I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap. My voice was steady, calm. "David, that account was never yours to depend on. That money came from me, from my pension, from my savings, from sacrifices you'll never know about. For years, I kept it going, not because I had to, but because I loved you, and because I wanted you to have a life easier than mine." He swallowed hard, shame flickering across his face. "I didn't know. I thought—" "You thought it was always there," I said, cutting him off gently. "You thought you were standing on your own 2 feet, when all along you were leaning on me. And all the while, you let Melissa speak to me as if I were some useless old woman, as if I were the burden." David flinched at the word. He looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "I heard her, David," I continued, my voice quiet but firm. "That night at dinner, she called me a burden. She said I'd ruin you, and you—" My throat tightened, but I pressed on. "You didn't say a word." His head dropped into his hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want to fight with her. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would pass." I shook my head. "Silence, David, is not kindness. It's agreement. By saying nothing, you told her she was right. And you told me that I didn't matter." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. David sat there, broken, his shoulders shaking slightly. For a moment, I saw not the grown man before me, but the little boy he used to be. The boy who once clung to me when storms frightened him. The boy who used to say, "Mum, you're my whole world." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "David," I said softly, "I don't want your money. I don't want your house, your things, your pity. All I've ever wanted was respect. To know that after everything I gave, I still mattered to you." He looked up then, tears running freely down his cheeks. "You do, Mom. You matter more than anything. I was a fool not to see it. Through the window, I could see Melissa still sitting in the car, her face tight with impatience. She wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to listen. She was here because she wanted her lifeline restored. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't give it back. Not to her. Not while she still saw me as nothing more than an obstacle in her way. I squeezed David's hand once more before pulling mine away. You're my son, David. I'll always love you. But love without respect is nothing. And until Melissa learns that, there will be no account, no more quiet sacrifices. It's time you both learn to live without leaning on me. He nodded slowly, brokenly, as if he knew there was nothing more to say. Outside, Melissa honked the horn, and with that sound, the weight of all the years settled between us, heavy and final. After David left that morning, the air in my house felt heavier than it had in years. I stood at the window and watched him walk back to the car. Melissa rolled her eyes as he opened the door, her arms crossed, her mouth moving fast in complaint. He slid into the seat beside her, his shoulders slumped. And for a moment, he looked more like a scolded child than a grown man. They didn't come inside together. That told me everything I needed to know. Melissa hadn't come to apologize, or even to understand. She had come to retrieve what she thought was hers. The money she assumed she could, continue draining without question. But that chapter of my life had closed. That afternoon, I sat in my living room, knitting needles idle in my lap, thinking about everything that had just happened. There was a time I would have felt guilty, a time I would have convinced myself I was being cruel, that perhaps Melissa was right. Perhaps I really was a burden. But as the hours passed, the guilt never came. Instead, a strange peace settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't being used. I wasn't the invisible hand patching the holes in their lives. I was simply me, Joan Whitaker, a woman who had given enough. The next day, David called again. His voice was softer this time, almost pleading. Mom, Melissa's threatening to sell the car. She says if you don't reopen the account, we'll lose everything. I listened quietly, letting him finish. When he finally fell silent, waiting for me to swoop in and fix things, I spoke carefully. David, I love you, but you need to understand something. That money was never meant to be permanent. I gave it to help you find your footing. Instead, you and Melissa built your life as if it would never end. That isn't living. It's leaning. And I can't let you lean on me anymore. There was a pause, then a shaky exhale. But, Mum, what are we supposed to do? You're supposed to do what every adult does, I replied firmly. Budget, work harder, cut back, learn to live within your means. You've been living on illusions, David, and illusions don't last forever. I could hear the weight of my words landing on him. He didn't argue. He didn't defend Melissa. For once, he just listened. Later that evening, as I sipped my tea by the window, I saw my reflection in the glass. My face was lined, my hair thinner than it once was. But behind my eyes was something I hadn't seen in a long time. Strength. The kind that comes not from carrying others, but from finally setting the weight down. The next Sunday there was no visit, no call, no laughter echoing through my kitchen. The silence should have hurt, but instead, it felt clean, like a wound finally beginning to close. I went to church that morning, and as I sat in the pew, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for more money, not for my own comfort, but for David. I prayed he would find the courage to stand tall, even if Melissa didn't stand beside him. Days turned into weeks, and little by little I noticed changes. The flashy purchases stopped appearing on Melissa's social media. David called once just to check in, his tone softer than before. He didn't ask for money that time. He simply asked how I was doing. That meant more to me than all the deposits I had ever made. One evening, I sat on my porch, the sun setting behind the oak tree my husband had planted, and I realized something important. I hadn't lost my son. Not yet. He was buried under shame and Melissa's influence, but he was still there, and perhaps, with time, he would see clearly again. As for Melissa, well, some lessons come hard. She had wanted me gone, erased, dismissed, but instead, she learned the truth. The woman she called a burden was the very foundation beneath her feet, and when that foundation was pulled away, she had nothing to stand on. And me? I had finally remembered my own worth. Looking back now, I realize Melissa did me a strange sort of favor. By calling me a burden, she forced me to look at my life differently. She made me see that I wasn't weak, and I wasn't leaning on anyone. In truth, I had been the one holding everyone else up. For years, I gave without question, quietly patching their holes, quietly keeping their home afloat. And yet, the moment they forgot where that security came from, they treated me like a weight around their necks. But here's the lesson I want to leave with you, especially those of you watching who, like me, have lived long lives full of sacrifice. You are not a burden. Your worth is not measured in what you give or what you withhold. It is measured in the love, the history, and the strength you carry inside you. I don't know what the future holds for David and Melissa. Maybe one day they'll rebuild, maybe they'll fall apart. That's their journey now, not mine. As for me, I've chosen peace. My days are my own again. My porch, my garden, my quiet mornings, they belong to me. And there's freedom in that. So to those of you watching, remember this. Respect is worth more than money. Dignity is worth more than comfort. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step back and let others face the weight of their own choices. Thank you for listening to my story.